As all of you know, this has been an intense couple of weeks, so I apologize in advance that my director's report will run long. There's been a lot going on. This should not need saying that San Francisco's public streets and public transit are for everyone equally. But for ages, transportation has been designed to exclude and oppress. Desidero Street had its sidewalks narrowed and travel lanes added only through the non-white neighborhoods starting in the 1930s. Throughout the 1950s, the freeways were cut through the city where they were because transportation projects got extra federal support for removing blight. Blight, of course, being defined essentially as non-white ownership. In the purpose and need statement for the Geary Expressway, where we recently demolished a pedestrian bridge from that era, the document stated that that project was necessary and the removal of Black businesses and Japanese-owned homes were necessary in order to, and I quote, halt Negro advancement. Even today, the legacy of our industry's history continues, and today, residents of historically Black neighborhoods in San Francisco and Oakland have 10 to 15 years knocked off their lifespan as a result of particulate emissions that continue to be dumped on their neighborhoods, as a result of streets that were designed to prioritize the speed of commute traffic rather than the needs of residents, and the fact that our transportation and land use patterns and services deny folks living in those neighborhoods access to employment, to services, to education. We in the transportation industry have for a long time been complicit in stripping away opportunity from people of color. We celebrate the legacy of Rosa Parks, Mary Ellen Pleasant, and Charlotte Brown here in San Francisco, but neglect our continued passive prioritization of the convenience of the privileged over the needs of everyone else, particularly the most vulnerable members of society. Like any decent human, I am heartbroken and outraged by the murder of George Floyd. His murderer was so calm and methodical, simply going about the business of government. We've seen the video. We've seen the videos of so many African Americans killed by agents of government for simple infractions or no reason at all. No reason certainly that I, as a well-dressed white person, would even be arrested for, let alone executed. George Floyd's murder is acutely dehumanizing. We at the SFMTA firmly support the sacred right of public protest on our public rights of way in any democracy. And unlike other transit agencies, we've continued mini service, including our owl service, all through the night of each protest, rerouting around the protest areas in order to make sure that our passengers, who are essential workers, as well as people attending the protest, are kept safe along with our operators. 2 days ago, I learned from social media that our muni buses are being used to transport police officers. This is apparently something that the agency has been doing for many years. I quickly confirmed that our buses were not being used to transport detainees. And this created, obviously, a conundrum for us. And so I reached out for advice. I talked to people of color throughout the agency, on our board, with our labor union leadership, and asked questions about, can an agency committed to social justice also provide mobility for police officers during national protests against police abuse of power? Their advice, like my own thinking, was, of course, deeply conflicted, but also in the end, fairly clear. Over the last few months, our bus operators have experienced a pretty significant increase in assaults. And while they are all horrified about the abuse of police power nationally, they're also dependent upon our local police officers to protect their safety. We are dependent upon the officers of the San Francisco Police Department for protection, just as all people should be. So as I work to try to reform the horrific history of my own industry, I also need to honor SFPD Chief Bill Scott's leadership towards necessary structural change within his. We're a city department, just like SFPD, and SFPD's officers are our colleagues. We collaborate with them every day on traffic safety and operator safety. But at the same time, we also have to acknowledge and own the emotional impact of our riders seeing such a visible partnership between the police and public transit. Police, for many people, being a symbol of ongoing oppression in their communities, and public transit, which is a place where everyone needs to feel safe and protected and comfortable. So I am anti-police brutality, and also at the same time, not against the officers of the peace who do seek to protect the vulnerable and redress police racism and cruelty. This is one of the many challenges I get to face as a bureaucrat. And the only way I can do it is with humility, continuing to seek the advice of people of color throughout the agency and the public about how to proceed, how to thread this needle, and how to, at the same time, keep trying to bend my own agency towards justice while righting past harms. That's a lot to say. I also need to cover the other more quotidian work of our agency in the last couple of weeks, because there's a lot going on, including continuing to do the hard work of internal change around ensuring that people of color within the agency are respected and heard. And that means continuing to advance all of the racial equity work that we've been doing in our external work, but particularly leading towards the racial equity action plan that is due to the city administrator and the mayor's office at the end of the year, which will require ongoing trainings that we've continued to do, even despite the COVID process. I also need to talk about safety. So we had another fatality in this last week. A cyclist was riding on Frederick Street. A motorist opened a car door. The cyclist, as a result of that, ended up being pushed into the street and was run over and killed by a second motorist. Dooring is a not unheard of form of violence and death against people on bicycles in San Francisco. And so, of course, our team immediately went out within 24 hours to do a quick response and has come up with recommendations not only about some quick changes that we can make to Frederick Street, but also, more importantly, stepping up our citywide campaign against dooring and training motorists to look over their left shoulder before opening the door. So we'll be providing some more detail on that in the coming weeks, and we'll be speaking to that as we talk about our recovery plan as well. Some other work that we're doing, we are, as you know, most of our construction was shut down during the shelter-in-place order. So we are starting up work again on transit-only lanes on 4th Street. We're also stepping up work on work that we had canceled during the COVID work on completing the protected bikeways on 7th Street and Townsend Street. We've also been struggling to deal with how we address our own tenants during the financial crisis that is a fallout of the COVID crisis. There was a Chronicle headline a couple of weeks ago that was incorrect about our rent forbearance program. Immediately after the shelter-in-place order, we had issued a 3-month rent forbearance for all of our tenants. We are now working on not only an extension to that, but also a rent forgiveness plan, because it is essential for us to maintain the viability of our tenants. It is not in our economic interest as a landlord to have our retail spaces go vacant, and it is certainly not in our interest as an entity that is dependent upon San Francisco tax dollars for our own financial survival. We need to be doing everything that we can in order to support our small businesses. And finally, I'd like to close by pointing out that it is June 2nd. This is the second day of Pride Month. And unfortunately, this year, the 50th anniversary of the Pride Parade, that parade will be canceled in its physical form, but moving online. And we are working in many ways to continue to celebrate Pride, both as a citywide event and also for our own LGBTQ employees. And finally, I'd like to point out that that Pride is a celebration of deep cultural change that happened historically as a result of the Compton's cafeteria riots in 1966 and the Stonewall riots of 1969. Two events in which transgender people fought back against police brutality and ended up creating what would be a long process of cultural change, but change that is absolutely necessary. Indeed, the history of our own agency arises out of violent protest. The San Francisco streetcar operator strike of 1907 was one of the pivotal events, in fact, one of the more violent events in labor history, and a pivotal event that resulted in the 1909 vote to create the first municipally owned and operated transit system in the world, an event that we should be very proud of and also understand the very difficult history that positive democratic change towards justice arises from. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair. Thank you.